Welcome everyone to PMP and Beyond. I know some of you have joined in previous months where it was called PMP Refresh Hour. We have done a little bit of rebranding, so I thank you for joining again. A little bit about me. I am a certified PMP holder. I also hold the ACP from PMI. That is the Agile Certified Practitioner certification. I have over 10 years leading corporate teams in the areas of learning and development, compliance, operations, quality assurance, customer experience, in the industries of healthcare, energy, and most recently, project management. I'm founder of CalThink, Project Management Services. That is the company that I own and manage and operate. It's the company through which I do coaching, and I also teach courses at Rice University through my company, CalThink. So I do quite a bit of project management focused work. I'm also an international Agile and Scrum coach. So I help companies kind of align their practices when they want to transition over to Agile from predictive or whatever method they were using to work. I'm also a public speaker, an MC, and lover of all things training. And I always say this is not to indulge myself. This is just to let you guys know that you are in good hands for these webinars. If you would like to connect, my website is on the screen, calthink.com. There you can find all types of study guides, flashcards, different resources to obtain your PMP. Also, all of my coaching and training websites and services are on my website as well. My email and my LinkedIn is there for you to connect. And I'll also put this back in the chat towards the end. So what is PMP and Beyond? Well, it is a free monthly training that I host for people like you all. I started this, it was called PMP Refresh Hour, and I started this way back in January after I passed the PMP myself a couple of months prior. And I mostly created this because I know just how much there is to study for the PMP. I always say the test itself is not super difficult, but there is just a lot of information to take in. So I wanted to create kind of a focused, high-level hour for you guys to study, for you to know what to study, what you need to cover in your personal prep time, and then also create a little community for you guys to ask questions to get to know each other and maybe form some study groups within our PMP community. So every month I cover a different topic. In February, we talked about the process grid. In March, we talked about PMI traps. We've covered inputs, tools, techniques. And then in June, our last PMP Refresh Hour, we covered the PMBOK 8th edition. And that was basically all of the high-level changes that we saw in the new edition compared to what we've been using for the last 5 or 6 years. And so PMP and Beyond is kind of a rebranded PMP Refresh Hour, and that's because we are in a new exam. So those of you who don't know and who have been studying, PMI did release a new version of the PMP exam on July 9th. And so because of that new exam, I've kind of rebranded PMP Refresh Hour. Refresh Hour was created to get those people who had started studying for their PMP over the hump of their certification before the exam changed. And I was able to help a lot of people kind of get certified right before the exam changed. Now, PMP Beyond still serves that purpose. I still have coaching, training services, lots of study resources for you guys to purchase and to view during your study prep. But now I'm also offering educational courses that you can claim PDUs for on your PMI.org website, and you need 60 PDUs every 3 years to maintain your PMP. So the audience is no longer just those who are going for their PMP, it's also going to cater to those who are actually holding their certificates like me and some of you. And so what's different is that we didn't have a chance to earn PDUs before. We were only focused on PMP related topics. Now you'll hear and see invitations for webinars to talk about, things like AI and project management. There's lots of people who get their certificate and don't really know how to transition into the world of project management, or even how to find other project managers to connect with. And so that is kind of the audience that I also want to bring into these monthly webinars. We know that PMI updated the PMBOK 8th edition, but what does that mean exactly? Numbers-wise, it means that people has decreased a bit from 42% to 33%. So you'll get a few less people-centered or people-focused questions on your exam. And the same goes for process. before July 9th, process covered half of the exam. It was 50% of the entire exam. That's been bumped down a little bit to about 41%. So it's still the heaviest weighted domain on the exam, but it's no longer half of your score. Business environment had the biggest change. So business environment was about 8% of the exam, meaning that it was pretty much just an afterthought, right? You can kind of logic or common sense your way through business environment questions. Now, PMI has put a lot more emphasis on business environment because they recognize that this is where the true value is for project managers in the real world. It's not knowing the 40 processes. It's not knowing the tools and techniques to use. It's not even knowing how to lead people or manage processes. It is how to get value out of the project that's been initiated and approved. And how do we align that value with organizational goals so that we can make changes, we can enable changes, we can make more profit, we can respond to regulatory requests or compliance related requests. So what is the true value that we're getting out of our projects? And then also, how do you handle and manage these projects when there's a lot of uncertainty involved? We know that risk is a big part of project management. And some people would argue in the previous version of the PMBOK that it was treated like just another process or maybe even an afterthought. But risk is hard coded and baked into the business environment domain in this new version of the exam. So you'll see things like risk, uncertainty, sustainability, and even some mentions of AI on the new exam. So you'll want to dig into business environment a little bit more if you were previously treating it, just as a couple of questions on the exam. For all of my visual learners, this is just another way to see how the domains have changed over the last year or so. Again, people has decreased from about 42% to 33%. Process also dropped off from 50 to 41, and business environment picked up and over tripled its presence on the new exam. So you definitely want to keep your eye out for business environment domain. So people overview, people again has gone down from 42 to 33%. Very few changes overall. You'll still see the same types of questions. The principles remain the same. So again, you lead people, but you manage projects. Leadership involves things like, motivating your team, empowering your team, giving them chances to learn new things, explore, obtain new skills. Managing is more so, is this being done correctly? Is the output matching what we did? Is a deliverable, produced? Is that, does it line up to expectations of stakeholders? It's very black and white, hard-coded stuff, where people is more, emotional intelligence, active listening, those sort of things. You still want to focus on motivational theories. So, theory X and theory Z and Vroom's theory and McClellan's theory and all of those theories about why people are motivated to, do work, achieve, and finish projects. So we want to make sure that we are still familiar with all of those different theories and then different ways to empower and motivate a team. And then also recognizing when your team has lost that motivation or when one team member has withdrawn a little bit and knowing how to handle those different types of scenarios. And then conflict management is also still a huge part of the people domain. So don't forget to cover those 6 different approaches for conflict resolution. And then, of course, leadership versus management is still going to be a pretty prominent theory and focus in the people domain. For process, lots of changes. At a high level, procurement has kind of gone away as its own standalone knowledge area. It's now one core process, and that's just plan, sourcing, strategy. And you'll find that in the governance domain. So it's going to be one of the first planning processes that you come across if you're reviewing the process grid. You'll still need to know, make or buy decisions. You'll still need to know different contract types. You'll still want to know how to handle vendors who aren't meeting performance expectations, but you won't see processes like, conduct procurement or control procurement or plan procurement management. Those 3 processes have been eliminated essentially from the new PMBOK version. Quality is kind of in the same bucket as procurement. You will not see a standalone quality knowledge area anymore. So processes like manage quality, control quality, and plan quality management are no longer existent on the new process grid. quality is kind of split between governance and scope. So you'll see more quality assurance processes in governance, making sure that we set quality standards, we know what the metrics to measure quality are. And then as you get into the scope processes, you'll see more quality control processes to make sure that the deliverables actually meet quality expectations and quality metrics and quality specifications. So it's been split and kind of baked into other processes. It is no longer its own domain. Risk is still a domain. It's still a standalone knowledge area. It has only 6 processes now. It has combined the 2 processes of perform qualitative risk analysis and perform quantitative risk analysis. Those 2 processes used to trip a lot of people up. They've now been combined into just perform risk analysis. So you no longer necessarily need to know the difference between qualitative and quantitative. Just know that there is some analysis that needs to happen when we are identifying risks and determining how much of an impact that risk will have on our projects. Risk is also pretty baked into business environment, as I mentioned before. So just make sure that you're really getting familiar with how to handle uncertainty, which is basically what the definition of risk is, right? It's any time that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We think something might happen, and it could be a positive or a negative. We want to make sure that we know the strategies to respond to different types of risks and how to plan risk responses accordingly. Next, for processes, you'll see that schedule has gone down from 6 processes to just 3 different processes in planning specifically, so planning processes. There used to be things like define activities, sequence activities, estimate activity durations. A lot of those processes are no longer official processes on the new process grid. So scheduling has been a little bit more simplified, but those practices of making an activity list and sequencing activities and making sure that they're logically ordered and the dependencies are there, those things still happen in the background. They're just not tied to a specific process. So they're just kind of baked into the overall schedule management domain area. And last but not least, one of my favorites is the combination of stakeholder engagement and communications. So if you're looking at the new process grid, you'll see all of the old communications management processes, planned communications management, managed communications, and monitor communications have now been kind of dragged into the stakeholder area. And stakeholder engagement is no longer stakeholder engagement. The knowledge area is just called stakeholders. So you'll see planned stakeholder engagement, planned communications management, managed stakeholder engagement, managed communications management, and so on and so forth. So you'll see a process for each of those areas in the combined area of stakeholders. Business environment has a couple of different changes as well. Again, risk is baked into the business environment. If you review the exam content outline on pmi.org, you'll see there are quite a few tasks and enablers listed in business environment that relate to risk. So that is going to be the biggest change that you see in business environments. Deciding which approach to use. This is a huge theme across the entire exam, especially the addition of hybrid scenarios and hybrid questions. I think PMI has finally realized or acknowledged that not everything is black and white, right? Things don't perfectly fit into a predictive bucket, nor do they perfectly fit into an agile bucket all the time. A lot of times in real life, we're working in a very hybrid environment, even in a hybrid organization. So deciding which approach to use based on the project scope, the stakeholders, the timeline, just the nature of the project, the industry, that's going to be key to making those decisions as a project manager for those business environments questions. Sustainability is a new concept, but you should absolutely consider it and factor it into all scenarios and decisions that you come across on the exam, including the scope itself. Sustainability just means that what we're doing today doesn't affect future generations or stop them or limit them from being able to, do their jobs or live on the earth or have the same access to resources as we do today. So if what we do today is going to negatively impact the future, then we should go another route for the sake of sustainability. So that is a new concept that you'll see all throughout the exam, And you definitely don't want to make any decisions or choose an answer that will impact the environment, impact the people, or impact profit. And those are the three P's of sustainability: people, planet, and profits. So always factor those three P's. Last but not least, AI is on the exam, but I think that it was a little bit overhyped before we actually started to get some feedback from those who took the new exam. It's just a tool. It's, think of it the same way that we use ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude. It's the same thing, same way that we would use, a stakeholder register or risk register. It's just automated. And so we still want to make sure that as humans, we're managing these tools, right? There's some oversight involved. We're not just putting a prompt into AI and then copying and pasting the response. We need to vet the answers, edit the answers, change the answers so that it makes sense to whatever, action item we're asking it to do. So never ever choose an answer that will allow AI to make the decision on your behalf. Always make sure the project manager or you yourself, as the project manager, is involved in whatever output AI gives you. And that is going to be the main thing to keep in mind for AI. So just think about it as a tool. It is not its own intelligence, machine. It's not a human itself. We still have to be involved in the outputs that we get from AI. All right, so what has actually changed on the exam? And this is where we get real feedback from test takers. I do a lot of market research. I talk to a lot of people, a lot of previous students, a lot of previous clients, and I try to stay on top of these insights because it's really helps me in my business, because I don't want my clients to focus on anything that really doesn't come up on the exam. And if there are some challenges, I want you guys to know those so that you can start to prepare for them today. So one of the biggest changes that I'm seeing is that the exam doesn't just ask questions anymore. It's a lot more interactive. So it's no longer just about, choosing an answer where you're matching the definition to the term, or you're pulling out a calculator to do some formula questions. You're writing down all the formulas before you start the test. That is no longer the case. No, nor is it just multiple choice anymore. So when I was training and coaching for the previous PMP version, majority of people's tests were multiple choice, even though on the exam content outline, you would see drag and drops, matching questions, point and click questions. You'd see a couple of other different styles that you may get, but in reality, people were just getting multiple choice for the most part. That has changed pretty heavily from what I hear. It's a much more interactive exam now. So the questions are drag and drop, right? Sequencing different process steps. It includes things like point and click questions and matching questions. There's some charts that you have to read, lots of tables and different artifacts that you'll have to read and then make decisions from. So it's a much more involved exam, right? You have to be a little bit more engaged to make sure that you're dragging the right button, you're clicking the right, area on the chart, you're reading the table or whatever, Excel spreadsheet or whatever notes that they give you. A lot of questions have a visual component. So whatever that visual component is, you want to make sure that you're getting familiar with it, getting comfortable with it before you answer the question. And of course, time management is still a factor there as well. So speaking of formulas, calculation questions are pretty rare nowadays. I know when I took my exam last year, the previous version of the exam, I think I had 3 formula questions and they did not require a calculator. The answers were very, I wouldn't say easy, but they were obvious. Or they used really big numbers so where you can do the calculations very easily. So you likely won't need a physical calculator on the test. And as I said, multiple response questions and those different types of interactive questions are showing up a lot more. Multiple response questions are, check 2 that apply or check all that apply. Those are some of the hardest style questions to come across on the exam because you just don't know. You don't know how many you're supposed to check. Sometimes they all seem right. Sometimes they all seem wrong. Sometimes, an answer could go either way, but you really have to pay attention to the scenario that it's giving you on the exam, pay attention to those keywords in each question and then go from there. But I will admit this is one of the hardest style questions on the exam. So just make sure that if you're taking practice exams or any other mock full-length exams, that there's some multiple response style questions in there to get you used to those. All right, time management. This is probably the one that shocked me the most, just how PMI has changed the layout of the exam when it comes to the different breaks and sessions. So one change that PMI implemented, I think it was official, is that they were thinking about increasing the time on the exam to 240 minutes, which would be exactly 4 hours. Right now, I think it's 230 minutes, so it's just 10 minutes shy of the 4-hour mark. But what's different is that first session is going to be 10 questions. These 10 questions are going to be your case study questions. So those are long, multiple paragraph questions, or scenarios rather. Each of those will have about 4 or 5 questions based on that scenario. So you may get about 10 questions across 2 scenarios, across 3 scenarios. There's really no hard rule, meaning, one case question or one case study gives you 4 questions. There's no kind of logic to that. Just know that you'll get about 10 questions across X amount of case study scenarios in that first section. So right off the bat, when you sit for your exam, you're going to start with case study questions. So just be prepared to start with those very long, exhausting questions. And after that section comes your first break. That is the biggest change regarding time management on the exam. It used to be you get through, about 60 questions on your first section, then you get a break, 60 questions on that second section, then you get a break, and then you wrap up with the 60 questions. Now you're just getting 10 case study questions, and then your first break comes up. That's really soon, really early into the exam, because that next stretch is going to include 85 questions. So this is where the mental challenge comes in for the new exam. It's really going to be a struggle for some to get through such a long stretch of questions without a break. After that 85 question block, you do get your second break, and then you'll wrap up with the third section, which is 85 questions as well. So this is, again, the biggest change as far as time management on the exam. And it's one of the biggest struggles and challenges that I'm seeing for people who are sitting for the new exam. It's just exhausting. And it's almost like it's a challenge of, how to manage your fatigue rather than do you actually know how to manage projects. That's kind of the feedback that I'm hearing from test takers. So please, when you are taking practice exams, especially those full-length exams, make sure that you are mimicking the breaking structure on the actual exam so that you're ready, right? You're ready to get through 10 questions, take a break, and then mentally prepare for that 85 question span, take another break, and then prepare yourself for that last stretch of 85 questions, which is a lot. I will admit that's a lot of questions without a break. Another thing to note about that first session with the case study questions is that this session or this section automatically closes once the timer runs out. So you don't get a chance to go back to this section. You don't get a chance to stay in this for as long as you want. The session closes automatically, and you cannot go back to that session to edit answers or anything. So if you fall behind in this section and you miss questions or you don't get time to answer certain questions, it can kind of compound you, meaning that you'll run out of time eventually at the end of the exam. So just try to make sure that you're managing your time during that case study portion. Try to get through all questions as quickly as you can, but don't rush through it. Make sure that you are reading each case study question, and then just preparing yourself for those next 2 very long stretches of the exam. What I will say is the case study questions, from what I am hearing, most people don't run out of time. So most people are finding that they have a few minutes left in that first section. They're closing it early, they're taking their break, and they're coming back for session 2. There are some instances where people do run out of time. That's how we were able to find out that the section does automatically close. But for the most part, there's plenty of time in that first section. So again, test endurance was probably the most common piece of feedback that I've received since the new exam has come out. Even more so than, the new AI content or the new sustainability content, it's really a matter of endurance. Can you last, right? Can you mentally prepare for 4 hours of questions? And also, I've been hearing that these case study questions may reappear during each of these sections. So it's not as if you'll never see these case studies again. It's just that you can't go back to that specific batch of questions to edit or, flag and review. So just be familiar and be ready to come across case study questions throughout the entire exam, but especially during that first part. The second kind of horror story that I'm hearing from new test takers are those who take it online. Online test taking has become extremely difficult, and it's becoming a challenge, and it's becoming the quickest way to either fail the exam or be forced to take it or be forced to kind of, deal with PMI's customer service center, which I've heard mixed reviews on how helpful they are. But this is just one scenario that kind of stuck out to me, and I just wanted to present it to this audience because I really, really highly, highly suggest if you can, if you're within a reasonable amount of distance of a testing center, please opt to take the test in person. Do not choose to take the test online. There's just way too many opportunities to fail. And it goes beyond, making sure that you're in a quiet space, making sure that your children or your family members or your roommates don't kind of bust into the room while you're taking the test. It's now about PMI system. Do they think that someone else is on the call with you? Do they detect, another program running in the background? If they even think that you may be cheating, they can shut your test down, and then you'll have to just kind of prove your case after the fact. It doesn't mean that if you are able to prove your case, you can continue the test on that date. You'll have to reschedule the test, come up with another time to take the test online. It just becomes a nightmare. For this specific candidate, they sat down for their PMP exam online, and PMI's software kept flagging a background process. So some kind of process that they thought was running in the background was flagged. This just means that PMI is trying to pick up on those scams where someone in a whole other part of the world is actually taking the test for you. There are programs that need to run in the background for those, connections to happen. So that's what PMI's system is trying to flag. But in this case, there was nothing running, according to the candidate. And so they called PMI support in the moment, and they were told to clear your cache, clear your cookies. And of course, this did not clear the issue. And so because PMI's system kept flagging this non-existent process in the background, they ended up being locked out of their exam. After months of studying, after months of prepping, after weeks of getting their own personal space prepared to take the test online, ultimately they could not, because they had to argue with PMI that, hey, I'm not cheating, I'm not sure what your system is recognizing, but I'm not running anything. And it just ends up being your word against PMI's word. Now, I have heard cases where PMI will do an investigation and they will say, okay, you didn't do anything wrong. That was, that's our bad, essentially. And they will either, if you were able to take the test, they will release the results to you and allow that test to be valid, or they'll allow you to retake the test at no additional charge. Either way, it's a headache. I would recommend finding a test center and sticking to in-person testing if you possibly can. One of the last things that I do want to talk about is the PMI study hall mystery. And I think I actually, for the sake of time, will skip this part. We'll save this for another webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and just wrap up and cover, what we talked about as far as challenges and exam content changes. My recommended action plan based on all of that information. We'll skip this part because we didn't actually go over the study hall portion, but there is some conversation happening in PMI study hall. And the debate is whether or not study hall is harder than the actual real exam. And there's like a set of 15 or so quizzes in study hall plus a full length exam at the end. And a lot of the conversation is that, hey, I do really well on these mini quizzes, these mini, 15 or so question quizzes, but when I go to the full length exam, my score drops like 20 points. And so there's a debate as to whether study hall is harder than the real exam. And then, there's kind of a question, WTF, why does my score look so different if I've been getting, 80, 90% on these individual exams and only 60% on the full length exam? So we'll talk about that in the month, next month's webinar. But spoiler alert, this is not abnormal. This has been the norm for a lot of people who have signed up for study hall after the exam has changed. So we'll talk about that more next month. I will highly suggest that you purchase study hall and then also purchase another simulator. So a simulator is just a full-length exam that kind of gives you the same experience that you would get if you were taking the real exam. Use 2 different simulators and then kind of triangulate your readiness, meaning compare all of your results and get an average across the 2 or 3 resources that you use, and then use that as your true readiness score. Don't just take one and run with it. Whether or not it's really, really good or really, really bad, use another simulator, maybe even 3 altogether, no more than 3, to kind of find an average and a baseline for where you actually are in your readiness scale. Review right and wrong answers. So use AI tools to kind of break down the answers that you get wrong, whether or not you're using study hall or another exam. Claude is really good, and I think PMI has its own AI. I forget what it's called. I think it's called PMI Infinity. But they have their own AI tool that you can use right on PMI.org that will also help you kind of break down the answers that you're getting wrong in study hall. But use AI to provide you context, give you the why about each question, and not only about the right answer, but why are the other answers wrong? Sometimes that's way more helpful than just knowing why this answer is right. You also want to be able to talk through the logic of why other answers are wrong. So use your AI tools to get context and close knowledge gaps. If your scores plateau, meaning that you're finding yourself getting the same score over and over again, then try to go through your prep course again. Rebuild your foundational information. Make sure that you understand the basis of business environment. Make sure that you understand processes. What's a tool versus a technique, what's an input versus an output, and then kind of go back and refresh yourself with the scores. Protect your stamina. So again, the multi-hour format, 4 hours for an exam, that's a lot of time and a lot of just brain power to give towards one single activity. So use your prep journey and your practice exams to build up that stamina and really find some strategies to manage your own focus for that 4-hour sitting. Choose an in-person testing center if you have the option. I cannot stress that enough. We've talked about the horror stories of online testing. So please, if you have a testing center that's within a reasonable distance from your home, choose that over an online exam. And then last but not least, get flashcards. Flashcards are so important. And to emphasize that, I've created 2 different versions of flashcards that I now have available on my site. The first set of flashcards that I have are printable flashcards. So this is just a PDF and a little, encouraging note there. But you can print this out and either fold the papers in half, or you could just use it on your phone and scroll through the definitions and the terms so that you can get familiar with the terminology that you'll need to know to pass the PMP exam. So again, just a standard PDF deck of flashcards. You'll see at the very top, each term has a category. So it could be a process, it could be a formula, it could be just a general term that you need to know, a concept, a framework, and then it'll let you know which card you're on. So card 5 of 306, and so on and so forth. I also have a set of interactive flashcards. Now, this is what I'm really, really excited about. This is the first time that I've released a product like this. But this is kind of a flashcard game, is what I call it. So once you purchase this interactive flashcard subscription, it lasts for 3 months, you'll be invited to this vault, and you'll want to scroll down to click here. And here is where you'll find your flashcard kind of game and experience. Each of the flashcards has a front and back, so all you have to do is click on the flashcard to get the definition. You'll see there's 306 of these. what's really cool about this interactive deck and the PDF is that I'll be updating them throughout, until the PMBOK changes. So the more and more terms and concepts that I come across, this number will increase and it'll be updated lively. So you don't have to go and download any new software. You don't have to purchase the platform again. You'll just see this number continue to increase as we add more verbiage and more definitions. What I really like about this tool is that you can kind of parse these into categories. So there's 300 flashcards total, but if you just want to focus on general terms, you'll see there's about 205 of those. If you just want to focus on processes, there's 40 of those. If you just want to focus on formulas, you can do that as well. So it's really cool to kind of target your studying during your prep work. You can also shuffle the deck, so you don't always have to go in alphabetical order. You can randomize the deck so that you don't know what's coming next. You can also use reverse mode. So reverse mode gives you the definition first, and then you guess the term. And that's one of the ways that I ask my clients to study when I'm doing coachings. So go through your deck front to back, use the term, try to guess the definition, but then also flip it over and use the reverse. So read the definition and try to see if you can figure out what term or definition or concept it's describing. For each of these, you can mark them as needs review if this is a term or definition that you're not really familiar with or you want to study more. And as you mark each needs review, you'll see this counter is increasing at the top right-hand corner. And so once you're done with this deck, you can then go back and just review the flashcards that you've tagged. So if you click on Begin Review, you'll see that it's only going to pull up those 6 terms and flashcards that you wanted to mark for review before. And you can shuffle this deck if you want to. You can use this deck in reverse mode. You still have all the same functions. So please, both versions of my flashcards are available on calthink.com. Again, you have the static version here, and then you also have the interactive version. The interactive version is subscription-based, so it's a 3-month subscription when you purchase. The flashcard deck is yours in perpetuity. Thank you all for joining. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you all next month at the September webinar.